Jake's hands trembled uncontrollably, his eyes wide with a terror no one in the sterile clinic waiting room could understand. Then a loud, mocking laugh cut through the silence, coming from the very man sworn to protect him. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jake Collins sat stiffly on the faded bench, the worn leather creaking beneath him as he tried to steady his breathing. The Veterans Clinic waiting room was cluttered with muted conversations and the shuffling of feet. But for Jake, the world had collapsed inward in a violent pulse. His fingers tightened involuntarily around the plastic cup, knuckles blanching white before it slipped from his grasp and shattered against the linoleum floor. The sharp crash echoed like gunfire in his ears, thrusting him back to a moment 4 years ago in a dusty Iraqi street. The blast had ripped through the convoy, the screams of comrades swallowed by choking smoke, and the metallic taste of blood and grit. That explosion hadn't just shattered the silence of a battlefield, it shattered Jake's peace, fracturing his mind with every second that followed. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist, as the room's fluorescent lights blurred into a stark, sterile glare. The world was no longer a place of muted colors, but a chaotic battlefield of shadows and sounds that gnawed at his control. Every heartbeat was a drum of war pounding in his chest. The flash came unbidden, an unwelcome visitor dragging him back to carnage he had buried deep inside. To the average onlooker, Jake's sudden jerk and frozen posture might have looked like weakness or frailty. But beneath that tremor lay years of silent endurance, a battle to survive an invisible war fought long after the guns had fallen silent. Ryan Mason, leaning casually against the wall in his crisp uniform, caught sight of Jake's distress and let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sliced through the tense quiet like a knife. "What's the matter, old-timer? Scared of your own shadow?" His voice was thick with contempt, laced with a bravado born of insecurity. To Ryan, Jake was an easy target, a symbol of outdated strength and vulnerability he was determined to belittle. Raised in a tough neighborhood where showing any weakness was a liability, Ryan's approach to the world was black and white. Strength was survival, and empathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. His mocking words were less about Jake and more about asserting his own control over a reality that often felt unstable. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly, a charged silence pressing down on everyone present. A few heads turned, eyes flicking nervously between the two men. The community segment filming nearby had captured everything: the tremor, the cup's shatter, the cruel laughter. The cameraman's lens, intended to showcase the resilience of veterans, instead framed a raw moment of humiliation that no one anticipated. The live feed broadcasted Jake's agony and Ryan's callousness without filter, freezing the moment for a wider audience. Jake's mind spun, caught in the whirlpool of memories and shame. But beneath the surface, a flicker of fierce, unspoken resolve kindled. The humiliation was real, but so was his will to keep fighting, against the trauma, the ignorance, and now the public gaze. This was more than a personal flash. It was a breaking point, one that would ripple far beyond the sterile walls of this small clinic. Every muscle in Jake's body tensed, not just in fear, but in silent preparation for a battle that was about to move from the shadows of his mind into the glaring light of public scrutiny. The backlash ignited like a wildfire, consuming every corner of the public discourse with fierce, unrelenting heat. Within hours of the clip's circulation, veteran advocacy groups issued scathing statements condemning Officer Ryan Mason's behavior as not just an isolated lapse, but a glaring symptom of a deeper, systemic indifference toward those who had sacrificed so much. Forums flooded with voices, some raw with anger, others weary from years of neglect, united by a shared demand for accountability and respect. Social media became a battleground where hashtags like #RespectOurVeterans and #EndPoliceBrutality trended, exposing fissures between communities, institutions, and ideals. The public's outrage was relentless. painting Ryan not merely as a rude cop, but as a symbol of a fractured system that failed to understand, let alone support, the invisible wounds carried by its protectors. Yet, defiance clung stubbornly to Ryan Mason like a second skin. Instead of yielding to the swelling tide of condemnation, he doubled down with a venomous certainty that chilled even the most detached observers. "I'm here to enforce the law, not coddle people who can't handle their past," he spat with a cold, calculated clarity that stripped any pretense of remorse. Those words, brutal and unapologetic, struck at the core of the conversation, transforming an already tense debate into a volatile clash of values. To the veterans and their advocates, Ryan's stance was an open wound. Salt poured onto the bruises of neglect and misunderstanding they had long endured. For many, his refusal to soften his posture crystallized the very barriers preventing healing and respect. Jake Collins found himself caught in the storm's eye, the harsh glare of public attention intensifying the turmoil already raging within. His PTSD, once a private burden, was now laid bare for millions to witness, dissect, and debate. The flashbacks surged with a renewed ferocity, uninvited and relentless. Explosions, screams, the choking smoke and chaos of war revisiting him in vivid, torturous waves. Each televised interview, each social media mention chipped away at his fragile equilibrium, threatening to undo the careful work of years spent rebuilding a shattered mind. Yet amid the pain, a stubborn ember of hope flickered, a belief that this exposure, brutal and unwelcome as it was, might force a reckoning. If the world could see the raw edges of his suffering, maybe it could also see the urgent need for change, for compassion woven into policy, for recognition beyond medals and ceremonies. Behind the scenes, the machinery of authority groaned under the weight of mounting pressure. Homeland Security, historically shielded by layers of bureaucratic inertia, found itself compelled to act, not purely out of moral clarity, but driven by the imperative to preserve institutional integrity and quell the growing unrest. The announcement of an official review was strategic, calculated to signal seriousness while buying time to navigate the storm. Internal investigations began, records were pulled, statements collected, all under the harsh scrutiny of a public hungry for justice and reform. The moment of reckoning arrived live on national television, a stage set for confrontation and revelation. The hearing was packed with stakeholders, advocates, and an audience riveted by the unfolding drama. Ryan Mason sat before the panel, his posture defiant, his voice laced with arrogance as he reasserted his cold justification. But the tide turned swiftly and decisively. Homeland Security officials, steely and unyielding, interrupted the spectacle with an announcement that cut through the tension like a blade. Ryan's badge was revoked on the spot, his authority stripped away in front of millions. The stunned silence that followed was broken by a roar of approval. Relief, vindication, and hope mingled in the voices of veterans and supporters who saw, at last, a measure of justice meted out in a public arena. This was no longer just a confrontation between two men, it was a symbolic rupture, a signpost heralding the possibility of real change amid the ruins of old wounds. The revocation of Officer Ryan Mason's badge resonated far beyond a single disciplinary act. It shattered a barrier long entrenched between society and its invisible casualties. For Jake Collins, that moment was more than a personal victory. It was a profound catharsis, a public acknowledgement of the silent wars waged by countless veterans whose struggles had been dismissed, overlooked, or cruelly ridiculed. The weight Jake had carried, years of memories haunted by explosions and the echoes of lost comrades, was no longer confined to the shadows of private torment. His courage to endure the raw exposure of a public flashback, vulnerable and unguarded before millions, crystallized a collective demand for empathy that had too often been absent from the national conversation. This triumph, however, was only a beginning, a crack in the hardened armor of systemic indifference. The badge revocation sent a ripple through police departments and veteran communities alike, signaling a long overdue reckoning with the reality of trauma and the necessity for compassionate reform. Yet the road ahead was rugged and uncertain. Institutional change, particularly in law enforcement's culture and training, was a slow, painstaking process that would require persistence far beyond headlines and viral moments. The transformation from hostility to understanding demanded sustained pressure, education, and above all, a shift in mindset toward mental health as a critical component of public safety and human dignity. Jake's trauma, once an invisible burden met with sneers and contempt, had been illuminated by the harsh light of public scrutiny. And in that illumination, it gained recognition as a legitimate struggle. The narrative around PTSD, especially among veterans, shifted subtly but meaningfully. No longer was it framed solely as weakness or instability. It emerged as a condition demanding respect, resources, and above all, humanity. This reframing reverberated through the media landscape, where veteran organizations seized the momentum to intensify advocacy efforts. Documentaries, interviews, and personal testimonies flooded screens and pages, telling stories of pain interwoven with resilience, hardship, counterbalanced by hope. Jake himself became an emblem of this new narrative, an unassuming man whose strength lay not in physical prowess or bravado, but in the quiet endurance of his scars. His presence in public discourse challenged stereotypes and dismantled misconceptions, revealing the complexity of healing and the nuanced nature of courage. Veterans who had long suffered in isolation found in Jake's story a mirror for their own struggles and a beacon of possibility. He was proof that the deepest wounds, though invisible, could ignite a spark of transformation, both personal and societal. Amid this evolving landscape, emotional scars persisted, etched into the fabric of every veteran's experience. Jake's nights were still punctuated by restless dreams, and the sudden flashes of memory could still seize him unannounced. Yet alongside these scars now stood the hard-earned respect of a society beginning to grasp the depth of their sacrifice, not just in combat, but in survival. The promise that no veteran's pain would be dismissed or mocked again was no empty rhetoric, but a call to vigilance and action, echoing in the halls of policymakers, advocacy groups, and everyday citizens alike. The story of Jake Collins closed on this precipice, not of finality, but of hope intertwined with realism. It was a chapter marked by progress born from pain, a testament to the power of visibility and voice. In the stillness after the storm, the road ahead remained long, but for the first time, it was paved with recognition, respect, and the possibility that the invisible wounds carried by so many might finally receive the healing they deserved.